Well, good morning, everyone. And what a delight. We're nearly there, nearly at Christmas, and what an amazing time it is. It's been a terrible year. It's going to be a great Christmas, and the new year is filled with hope. I want to thank you for listening in and joining us as a community throughout this last 9 months as we've gone online with these morning thoughts. And thank you for the encouragement. And I want to apologize for the glare in my glasses. If I was half competent, I'd know how to do lighting and backdrop and all of that stuff so you didn't have that glare. But as it is, I don't know how to do that stuff. And so we've got the glare. Okay. 8 centuries before Jesus was born, one of the tiny windows that God opened in his amazing Advent calendar was a prophecy from the prophet Isaiah in chapter 9. You'll know it well, but there's one or two details that we often gloss over to get to the punchline that we find in verse 6 onwards. And I want to underline one of those little gems this morning, and then next week we'll return to this passage. Let me read it to you. Verse 2 of chapter 9 of Isaiah. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the deep darkness, a light has dawned. You, God, have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For, as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot in battle, and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. Why? For unto us a child is born in time. To us a son is given who comes from outside of time. And the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Isn't that brilliant? Well, I want to underline what the prophet Isaiah saw and said in verse 5. Every boot of the booted warrior will be fuel for the fire. Every boot of the booted warrior. The NIV just says every boot of the warrior, but actually in the Hebrew, boots comes twice, just to underline the point. Now, I no longer have my British Army boots that I'd had, but I've got here some British Army issue shoes. How about those? I mean, they used to have lots of studs. They were issued to the Guards Brigade as their best shoes, and for their number 2s, they were also issued to Scots regiments. They're a fantastic brogue made by Sanders. That's an army shoe, but look at that puppy. I mean, look at that sole. And if you can imagine, it had a load of studs and Blakeys. You can see where the studs have been taken out. That was some serious shoe. That was their dress shoe. Just imagine an army boot. Well, the picture Isaiah paints is of Israel being crushed under the boot of their enemy Assyria. And Assyria's oppression of them is symbolized by her boots. Let's think of that verse again. Every boot of the booted warrior. Now, I'm going to read you a long quote, but it's a belter. In the book, A Short History of War, it says this: the armies of the Iron Age also made revolutionary advances in tactical mobility and proficiency. The Assyrian army invented the leather jackboot. Earlier armies of the Middle East wore an open sandal as a regular military footwear. And while that worked in the desert climate, sandals were ineffective in preventing foot injuries to troops forced to conduct operations in rough terrain. Moreover, the sandals offered no protection for soldiers who served in armies that had large horse contingents. The press of an animal's hoof upon a soldier's foot could frequently cause debilitating injuries. Sandals basically were useless. And then it says this: the lack of adequate footwear was a major factor limiting technical and tactical mobility of early armies. The Assyrian army was the first to improve on military footwear. The Assyrian soldier wore a knee-high leather jackboot with thick leather soles, complete with hobnails to improve traction. The boot had thin plates of iron sewn into the front to protect the shin. The boot kept injuries to a minimum and was one of the primary reasons why the Assyrian army was able to move easily over rough terrain. Following their lead, lots of other armies copied them. Now, interesting quote. Let's go back to the text. The Assyrian army boot was infamous, and it was a symbol of enemy power, enemy superiority. Here were poor little Israel, barefoot or in leather sandals, up against the Assyrian army who had boots on. And Isaiah says, hey, don't you worry about them Assyrians. Every boot of the booted warrior will be thrown in the fire. Isn't that great? Isaiah compounds the sense of Israel's state of oppression, not just under the boot of the Assyrians, but with more metaphors of oppression and servitude and control. He talks in verse 4 about the yoke, the bar, and the rod. And Isaiah anticipates that when the Messiah comes, when the wonderful counselor comes, when this one who is the mighty God and everlasting Father and Prince of Peace comes, then the boot of the booted warrior will be thrown in the fire. Not simply lifted off their throats, but burnt, verse 5. And that the yoke and bar and the rod, verse 4, will be shattered. And it will be so dramatic and decisive a deliverance, it will be as when 300 people defeated Midian. Later in Isaiah chapter 34 to 37, we read of this very defeat of the Assyrians and their boots. At night, the angel of the Lord came, and he destroyed their army, and the king of Assyria, Sennacherib. He ends up running home where his sons kill him. Like many prophecies, it had a contemporary relevance to Isaiah's listeners. They lived in fear of the Assyrians, oppression by the Assyrians, and that was symbolized, that was figured to them by boots. But there was a time when the boot would be delivered. It would actually happen for them after this prophecy. But there, of course, is this spiritual truth for us. There is a deliverer coming, bringing deliverance. A mighty God who is powerful and eternal and wonderful, and he's going to set us free. How about that? That's Christmas for you. There's a remarkable song by Mark Lowry called Mary Did You Know? And it's a song sung asking Mary questions, whether what she knew about this child that she had conceived and was giving birth to. It's covered by Celine Dion, Kathy Mattea, CeeLo Green and others. Mary, did you know? There's a line in it that says, did you know that the child that you delivered will soon deliver you? Many Christian people are overwhelmed. They're gripped by sin and demonic shadows and guilt and fear and shame, and trapped in their circumstances, and trapped with themselves. Tennessee Williams speaks about caged birds accept each other, but it's flight that they long for. It's flight they long for. People long to break free. And that's what Christmas is all about. That thick old boot, thick and with hobnails, crushing, Jesus comes to remove. You know, Christians are often just as bound as non-Christians. We've emphasized the gospel in terms of forgiveness and a future, but we've lost the idea of freedom. And that's what this prophecy promises. Let freedom ring. Yes, unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. And what's he going to do? He's going to take off us the boot of the Assyrians, the hob-nailed boot that crushes us. Christmas is about God breaking in to break us out. Christmas is about deliverance. Christmas is about the birth of a deliverer. Too many Christmases have passed, and many of us are still not free. So what binds you? What oppresses you? What fear? What sin? What shadow? What shame? What compulsion? What do you need freedom from this Christmas? Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and he's the one who will remove every boot of the booted warrior and throw it in the fire. This Christmas, look for, pray for, anticipate, and receive deliverance.